Welcome back to Prospect Watch, presented to you by the Rookie HQ. And we're going to do what we always do. And we're going to go and explore the profile of a rookie. See, I said explore the profile, not explore. Anyway, we're here today to talk to you about Omar Cooper Jr., the Indiana wide receiver who is somehow just still underrated. So he's my wide receiver 5 in the class, and we're going to get into his profile today. So he comes in a 6 foot, 199 pounds of the combine, runs a 4.43, if I'm not mistaken. And this is all that shows up all over the tape. I mean, he had 207 yards and 4 touchdowns in a game versus Indiana State or Kennesaw State, one of the lower level FCS teams. He set the record for the University of Indiana and tied the Big Ten record. And when you dig deeper, it's not just the gaudy numbers that he put up. I mean, this is a guy who I feel like the profile is there's so much more to what he's shown, even though he gave us tremendous performances and put up some gaudy stats with that undefeated Indiana national championship team. So he's one of the most explosive receivers in the country. If you could line him up in the slot, you can line him up outside. I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's make sure that we do the just due. So he's a local product. So he's out of Indianapolis. He's out of Indianapolis, a former 4-star recruit. And he was one of the top players in the state. Like I said, he's a 4-star recruit. He's been there. He stayed there his entire time, which is just an anomaly in the NIL era. So shout out to him for sticking it out and honestly betting on himself and making the right decision and getting it right the first time. So this is a guy who finished his career with 132 catches, 2,800 yards, and 22 touchdowns. So just between he and Elijah Surratt, his teammate who will also be playing on Sundays, they combined for 66 career touchdowns in their career. Sorry for the redundancy there, but I think that Omar Cooper is, with his profile, you have so much versatility and flexibility, and you had a year-over-year shift. So in 2024, he primarily played outside and averaged about 17 yards a catch, put up 564 yards and 7 touchdowns. And then this year he really broke out. I mean, he finished with over 900 yards and 13 touchdowns. So you have the alignment versatility. You have the ability after the catch that is incredibly dynamic. And then you have the fact that the NFL teams are falling in love with him. If you recall from the combine, there was a massive section. You had Daniel Jeremiah singing his praises. You had the crowd going crazy anytime that both times that he ran the 40 and they announced his name. So you have a lot of cachet going into the NFL, and he's become one of the fastest risers. He's actually ranked ahead of Elijah Surratt for me. And I think it's because this profile, his abilities are something that we see over and over in the NFL in terms of redundancy. So you have all of these traits, but there's not much missing. It's just time on task. There's attention to detail. Those are the few things that you could really come up with when you're talking about Omar Cooper. So let's get into the film. So when you turn on the tape, you have a guy who's genuinely generating explosive plays and just breaking your defense's will with these back-breaking yards after the catch performances, creativity. I don't even know what to call it. Like he's creating a play after the play that ends drives, and he's fully capable of doing that. I mean, this is a guy that has a 75-yard rushing touchdown on his resume. So he has the ability to stretch the field from the slot or outside. And then you have the ball tracking skills, and then you have the red zone production. So he's not the biggest receiver, but he understands and tracks the ball and knows how to play the ball in the air, which is an underrated trait, even for someone who doesn't have the massive stature that you would think, like a Denzel Boston. He's not 6'4", he's 6 foot, and he came in right at 200 pounds at the combine, 199 to be exact. So the skill set the skill set just leads you to have some really aggressive visions about what he potentially could be. So look, we gave you a pound of sugar. Now I got to give you an ounce of medicine. So let's talk about what he could do to potentially improve. So one of the biggest one of the biggest things that's going to be a determinant of his ceiling is his route tree development. So while he does have good and effective setups and head fakes at the top of routes out of the slot, and we saw him have success as an outside wide receiver in 2024, we do want to see a more expanded route tree. Now, that is just kind of a function of the Indiana offense. These guys all bought the Kurt Signetti Kool-Aid, and they were just bought into doing their jobs to the best of their ability, and that ability won them a national championship. So it's hard to argue with the results, and all these guys are going to become multi-millionaires and probably, hopefully, potentially, possibly play for a very long time. So that's the first thing is I want to see, not to say the absence of evidence is not the evidence of absence. So he can do these things. He just wasn't, he was playing the role that he was asked to play on the team. So another thing that we need to see is we need to see how he addresses physical press coverage, and being, longer, more adept skill-wise corners in the NFL, how he's going to adjust and handle. What's his game plan for that? We saw a guy like Mekhi Lemon struggle against future All-Pro Leonard Moore out of the University of Notre Dame when they played USC. So he's got to have a plan for those types of things. Even though this is about Omar Cooper, it's still transitive properties because they're very similar body types, and they're probably going to win very similarly in the NFL. So let's move on to the comp section. I'll give you, just like the other videos, I'll give you a low-end outcome, a median outcome, and a high-end outcome. So we'll start with the low-end outcome first. And that low-end outcome is former Titans receiver Kendall Wright out of Baylor. If it just never really all quite computes and comes together, you might be able to get him force-fed into a 1,000-yard, 130 target season off of minimal efficiency. So I guess we'll slash it. And we'll say Darnell Mooney and Kendall Wright for the low-end outcome. For the median outcome, we have a guy like Wan'Dale Robinson, who at the University of Kentucky was extremely tough after the catch. We just saw him put up his first 1,000-yard season. He just signed with the Titans, ironically enough. And I think that if he's able to accentuate some of the strengths, and then he's with a play caller who's willing to allow him to flourish, then that is something that's something that has a lot more fantasy viability year over year than a profile like Darnell Mooney or Kendall Wright in the low end outcome. And then the high end outcome is going to be Jarvis Landry, but with more juice. So essentially kind of like Luther Burden, a guy who's really creative and explosive after the catch, who's extremely reliable and way tougher at the catch point, much tougher at the catch point than what you would allude to. So all of those things come together, and it's got to be a perfect storm. He's not the perfect prospect. He is really good, but there are some flaws that could be accentuated in the wrong situation and hidden in the right situation, and allowing those talents to come forward that we saw over and over again with that Indiana Hoosiers team. So just a couple quick notes. So he's at 2.5 career yards per route run. That's decent. I mean, he was much better against zone this year at 3.1 yards per route run than he was against man coverage, where he was at 1.8 yards per route run. So you have a guy who's got a lot of versatility, and the NFL's playing about 73% zone coverage these days. So we're looking for those guys. I mean, my good friend Jeremiah always says, you want the easy button, the slot, the cheat targets that are going to allow for you to go 4 for 40 on one drive and completely change your fantasy outlook. And that is exactly what Omar Cooper is. So with Omar Cooper, he enters into the 2026 draft with a profile that combines explosive production, scoring ability to put it in the paint from anywhere, and a vertical slot threat with more physicality than you're giving him credit for in a 200-pound frame. His ceiling ultimately is going to depend on how he continues to develop as a complete route runner and what the play caller that he's married to on this rookie contract sees and wants to do with him. But the tools are all there for him to be a future high-end wide receiver 2 with wide receiver 1 spike weeks for fantasy purposes. So if you made it this far, thank you for listening, liking, downloading, subscribing. If you haven't, go and leave a 5-star review on the Rookie HQ podcast or podcast channel over on over on wherever you get your podcasts. So if you want to just listen to Chev GPT and these prospect breakdowns every week, you can do so there. And follow me on the Twitter X. So we've reached the end of this video. And as I always leave you, just know there's ball watchers and there's ball knowers. Assign yourselves accordingly. I'll see you in the next video.